They were called les enfants de la honte, the children of shame. Between 1908 and 1960, thousands of mixed-race children vanished from the Belgian Congo. Some historians say 15,000. Others say closer to 20,000. The exact number is still uncertain, not because the crime was hidden, but because it was buried under paperwork. Every removal was written down. Every transfer was stamped and signed. Every child was reduced to a file number. For decades, the Belgian government kept these records locked away in basement archives in Brussels. Boxes labeled classified. Files sealed until 2017. This was not a secret passed in whispers. It was a secret kept in filing cabinets. Mothers searched for their children and were told the same sentence again and again. It is for their own good. But whose good was it really? Before we continue the story of Marie-Thérèse Kawina and the children taken into Catholic missions in Katanga province, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and have notifications turned on. What you are about to hear is not a legend or a rumor. It is documented history. And please leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. This story needs to be heard everywhere. What makes this story so disturbing is not that it happened in secret. It is that it happened in plain sight. It was written down, approved by committees, executed with the same efficiency Belgium used to extract rubber, copper, and uranium from Congolese soil. This was not the work of a few cruel individuals. It was a system, an official policy. A program designed to maintain colonial order at the cost of human lives and broken families. It was violence without blood. Erasure disguised as charity. In the early 1920s, the city of Elizabethville, now known as Lubumbashi, spread across the copper-rich land of Katanga like a European dream planted in African soil. By 1923, it had become one of the most important colonial cities in the Belgian Congo. Wide boulevards cut through the landscape. Jacaranda trees imported from South America lined the streets, their purple flowers falling onto red dust that never fully disappeared. The buildings were solid and proud, built to last, with tiled floors and shaded verandas. This was a city meant to look permanent. It existed to serve the Belgian crown and the Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, the powerful mining company that pulled immense wealth from the ground. But the city was divided. The European quarter sat on higher land, where the air was cooler and the dust thinner. Belgian families lived there among gardens, tennis courts, and private clubs. African servants moved quietly through these spaces, present but never belonging. Below, in the lowlands, stretched the Cité Indigène, the native quarter. Narrow dirt roads, crowded houses made of mud brick, markets filled with noise and smoke. It was close enough to serve the city, but far enough to keep it separate. This separation was not accidental. It was enforced. At the top of the colonial system were Belgian administrators, often young men sent from Brussels with contracts promising adventure and advancement. Below them were territorial agents who enforced labor, taxes, and discipline. And between these worlds were the évolués, educated Congolese men trained by missions. They spoke French, wore European clothes, and lived in a dangerous middle space. Useful, but never equal. Marie-Thérèse Kawina lived at the very bottom of this structure. She was 19 years old and worked as a domestic servant in the home of Albert Deschamps, a mining engineer from Liège. He arrived in Elizabethville in 1920 with his wife Marguerite and their 2 children. He worked for Union Minière and believed deeply in his own importance. Marie-Thérèse was the daughter of a local chief. Her father had sent her to a Catholic mission school, believing education would protect her future. There she learned to read French, sew linen, and believed that obedience would lead to opportunity. Instead, it led her to the Deschamps household. She scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and learned how to make herself invisible. In colonial homes, young African women were expected to disappear, yet their bodies were constantly watched. They were considered beneath respect but close enough to be used. Marie-Thérèse moved quietly, eyes lowered, following unspoken rules. Never look directly at a European. Never speak unless spoken to. Anticipate needs before they were expressed. Inside, resentment grew. She had been taught to hope, and now hope felt like a lie. Albert Deschamps treated his staff as objects. His wife Marguerite ruled the household with cold precision. She was obsessed with order, appearances, and racial boundaries. She saw herself as a guardian of European values in Africa. By March of 1924, Marie-Thérèse was pregnant. She tried to hide it. Loose clothing, careful movements, silence. But women notice these things. Marguerite noticed. Her reaction was not shock. It was anger, sharp and controlled. But not at her husband. That would have meant admitting what everyone already knew. Belgian men regularly slept with African servants. This was not seen as scandalous. It was seen as inconvenient. The real problem was not the act. It was the result. The child, mixed-race children, officially labeled Métis, were considered a threat. They exposed intimacy across racial lines. They challenged the idea that Europeans and Africans were fundamentally separate. They complicated laws, inheritance, and social control. The colonial system could not tolerate ambiguity. So it created a solution. Children would be removed from their African mothers. They would be placed in Catholic missions designed specifically for Métis children. There they would be raised away from African influence, trained in European values, and kept under strict supervision. Mothers would receive small payments and reassurances. Fathers would remain unnamed and untouched. The system would continue undisturbed. Marie-Thérèse gave birth on November 3, 1924, in a native hospital. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. A single exhausted nurse oversaw several women. Metal tables, harsh lights, crying babies. She named her daughter Celeste. For 3 months, she hid the baby in the servants' quarters behind the Deschamps house. A small room, one window. She nursed Celeste before dawn and late at night. She sang lullabies in Luba, quietly, desperately, trying to memorize her child's face. But in a city built on surveillance, no child could remain hidden for long. And soon, someone would come knocking. Part 2 will reveal how the colonial machine moved into action, and how Marie-Thérèse learned what, for their own good, truly meant. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and stay with us. The children of shame deserve to be remembered. Part 2. The children taken and the mothers left behind. The city of Elizabethville seemed alive that morning in February 1925, but Marie-Thérèse Kouina's world had shrunk to a single, unbearable reality: they were coming for her baby. The network of informants, the silent oversight of European employers, the unrelenting pressure to conform to colonial rules, all of it worked against her. Whispers floated through the servants' quarters, subtle glances exchanged in the markets, questions from other women who feared to speak too loudly. It was only a matter of time before Celeste would be taken. And then they arrived. It was a Tuesday, and the jacaranda trees were in bloom. Their purple petals scattering across the red dust. The scent of copper hung heavy in the air from distant mines. The sun beat down like a hammer, promising an exhausting day. 3 figures approached the Deschamps household. Father Gustave Leclerc from the Mission de Saint-Joseph, a territorial agent named Peter Vandenberg, and a Congolese policeman whose name Marie-Thérèse never learned. He was young, maybe 25, standing behind the 2 white men like a silent shadow, his face carefully neutral. Father Leclerc carried papers as if they were holy relics. His thin lips pressed together, eyes cold, holding the weight of authority in his every gesture. He spoke slowly in French, explaining that Celeste had been classified as a Métis child under Colonial Decree 1523 of 1920. The decree allowed authorities to remove mixed-race children from their mothers if the fathers were European and the mothers were deemed incapable of proper upbringing. His words were a storm of bureaucratic euphemisms, a legal veil over an act of unthinkable cruelty. The decree had been written in Brussels by men who had never seen Africa, approved by ministers who believed they were solving a problem, and executed by priests who thought they were saving souls. Marie-Thérèse understood only half of what he said. Her mission school French had taught her enough to read and write, manage markets, and follow household orders. Legal jargon was another world. But the gesture of Peter Vandenberg toward her baby, that she understood perfectly. Vandenberg, cold-eyed and precise, reached for Celeste. His movements were measured, like a man performing a duty rather than a crime. Marie-Thérèse ran. Not far. Elizabethville was a city under constant watch. Every alley led back to European authority. Every street was monitored. But she ran enough to force a chase. She raced past the cook, Odessa, who dropped her morning bread in silent horror, past the servants' quarters, past drying laundry that flapped like distressed flags. Chickens scattered at her feet, squawking as if protesting the injustice unfolding. She made it 50 meters before the Congolese policeman caught her. His hands gripped her arms firmly but without cruelty. He spoke softly in Swahili, words the white men could not understand. "Don't make this worse. They will take her anyway. Don't let them hurt you." In his eyes flickered something Marie-Thérèse recognized, a resignation, a quiet understanding of powerlessness. When Celeste was pulled from her arms, Marie-Thérèse let out a sound that was not quite a scream. It came from somewhere deeper, from a part of her soul being torn apart. Odessa would later tell the other servants that she had never heard anything like it, a sound that could haunt dreams for years. Father Leclerc held Celeste awkwardly, stiff and unused to infants. Vandenberg produced a small piece of paper, a receipt confirming that one Métis female child, 3 months old, had been transferred from Marie-Thérèse Kouina to the Mission de Saint-Joseph for proper Christian upbringing. He offered her a pen. Her hands trembled too violently to grasp it. He signed on her behalf, placing an X in the line for her signature, as if her existence and consent were irrelevant. 200 francs were pressed into her hands, roughly 2 months' wages. The money was precise, calculated, detached. Just like the copper ore extracted from Katanga, her child had been assigned a value. The entire process took less than 15 minutes. By the time Marguerite Deschamps appeared, curious at the commotion, the men were already walking back toward their black Ford truck, its engine idling impatiently. Marie-Thérèse knelt in the dust, the bills scattered like fallen jacaranda petals. Her wail was a sound of utter desolation. Marguerite did not flinch. She walked past her without a word, rang the bell for morning tea, and returned to the European normality of her house. In that world, the removal of an African woman's child was routine, ordinary, expected. The Mission de Saint-Joseph lay 15 kilometers outside the city, isolated along a rutted dirt road that became impassable in the rainy season. Founded in 1922 to house Métis children, it was funded by the colonial government and Belgian Catholic charities who believed they were civilizing Africa. By 1925, it held 43 children, from infants to 12-year-olds, all taken under Decree 1523. Celeste's new name became Celeste Deschamps, her father's surname recorded as if he had acknowledged her. Her birthplace was rewritten as the mission itself, as if she had emerged from nowhere, disconnected from her mother, her people, her past. This was not care. This was erasure. Father Leclerc ran the mission with strict discipline, believing European ways could purify the children of their African heritage. French replaced luba. Forks and knives replaced hands. History and catechism replaced lullabies and memory. Memories of mothers were discouraged, punished with hours of kneeling on dried corn kernels. Children were taught to believe their mothers had given them up willingly, out of love, to secure a better life. Some of the older children remembered their mothers, whispering fragments of lullabies and smells in dormitories at night. But the younger ones, like Celeste, taken as infants, grew up believing the mission was their only home. Their identities were shaped in a vacuum, disconnected from the world they were born into. Marie-Thérèse did not give up. She walked 15 kilometers to the mission, again and again, hoping to glimpse her daughter. Sister Margaretha, a stern Flemish nun, always refused her entry, claiming visits would confuse the children. Father Leclerc threatened her with fines or imprisonment if she continued to disturb the mission. She adapted. She circled the mission walls, studying gaps, balancing on termite mounds, watching the children during playtime. Hours passed, her heart raw, scanning for a familiar face. Celeste was elusive. Infant faces change quickly. Maybe she was there. Maybe she had already been moved to another mission. Marie-Thérèse was not alone. Other mothers joined her vigil. Josephine, whose son Patrice had been taken at age 2, Amina, who had lost twins, Beatrice, whose daughter Sylvie was taken, leaving her unemployed and without recourse. They shared a silent, unbreakable grief, standing together atop termite mounds, watching over the children stolen from them. These women were bound by a single truth. Their children were alive, but out of reach, swallowed by a system that had calculated the worth of a mother's love and found it wanting. Part 3 will explore the methods the missions used to erase identities and how the stolen children grew up trapped between two worlds, neither African, nor truly European, and the quiet resistance that began to take root among the mothers left behind. If this story moved you, subscribe, share, and comment. The world needs to remember the children of shame. Part 3, The Watchers and the Hidden Records. They stood quietly along the edge of the mission courtyard, peering through cracks in the walls, balancing on termite mounds, straining to see what had been stolen from them. Marie-Thérèse and the other mothers watched the children as if the playground were a window into a world they could never touch again, a world that had taken their futures, their children, their lives. But the colonial administration did not see it as cruelty. They saw it as progress. Reports from Brussels praised the Métis program, its efficiency, its humanitarian goals, its success in preventing a problematic mixed-race underclass. In their minds, the children were being saved from poverty, ignorance, and moral confusion. They were raised as Christians, educated as Europeans. Mothers were spared the burden of children they supposedly could not properly raise. Everyone benefited. At least, that was what the officials claimed. The system justified itself. And yet, systems built on taking children from their mothers tend to expand. They find new reasons to separate, new categories of children who need saving, new rules to enforce control. By 1930, the Mission de Saint Joseph housed over 100 children. By 1935, 3 more missions had been established across Katanga province, all dedicated to the same purpose, silent monuments to stolen childhoods, each wall steeped in the quiet suffering of those who had been taken. The colonial machinery became ever more methodical. Births were registered, mothers identified, fathers documented when possible. Territorial agents were not given official quotas, but everyone understood the rules. Finding and removing Métis children was part of their job. Performance was measured not by compassion, but by efficiency in enforcing racial hierarchy and colonial order. And Marie-Thérèse learned a cruel truth. Education, the very thing she had hoped would protect her, had offered no shield. The same priests who taught her French and catechism, who promised knowledge as a path to opportunity, also taught her that her love for her child was conditional. Her motherhood was revocable. Her humanity was measured by men who would never truly see her. She never spent the 200 francs they had given her. She folded the bills carefully, wrapped them in cloth, and hid them beneath the floorboards of every room she lived in. She carried them from one household to another, moving through Elizabethville's servant quarters, from one European family to the next, eventually leaving the city entirely. The bills softened with age, the ink fading, but she kept them. They were evidence, proof, a reminder of the price Belgium had placed on her daughter, a tangible ache she carried every day. For years, the missions operated with rigid discipline. Father Gustave Leclerc ruled with an iron hand. His word was law, his presence a constant reminder to the children that the world outside their walls was irrelevant. French replaced Luba. Laughter and cries were measured, controlled. The mission children were taught to see themselves as separate from their Congolese mothers, taught that love for a mother could be dangerous, that obedience was their path to survival. Then, in 1936, a subtle tremor shook the rigid system. Father Leclerc was replaced by a younger priest, Father Antoine Dubois. Arriving from Belgium, Dubois carried a different sensibility. He had studied theology at Leuven University, writing his dissertation on the moral obligations of colonial powers toward indigenous populations. His work had drawn both praise from progressive circles and suspicion from the colonial administration. They did not welcome priests who asked hard questions about morality. Dubois was meticulous, but his meticulousness served a different purpose. In addition to the official reports required by the colonial government, he began keeping a private ledger. Small, leather-bound, hidden in his desk, it became a repository for the stories the children could not speak aloud. He recorded memories, whispers, fears, small acts of rebellion, moments of longing. He spoke to the older children who remembered their mothers. He listened quietly, sometimes taking their hands as they told him about lullabies, faces, scents, names long forgotten. Their eyes darted nervously as they shared, unsure if speaking would punish them. Dubois wrote it all down. Which children cried at night, which ones stopped asking questions, which ones clung to fleeting memories no one could erase. This was dangerous work. He knew the colonial government would not tolerate such sentimentality. Yet, he persisted, quietly, in the shadow of surveillance, documenting the humanity that the system sought to erase. For the mothers like Marie-Thérèse, hope became both fragile and persistent. Each Sunday, she would circle the mission walls, balancing precariously on termite mounds, trying to spot Celeste among the other children. Sometimes she thought she saw her, a flash of light skin, a familiar laugh, but each time the child was only a ghost of recognition, an image she clung to in desperation. Other mothers joined her in this vigil. Josephine, whose son Patrice had been taken at age 2, shared the silent weight of grief. Amina, a mother stripped of her twins, walked alongside her. Beatrice, whose daughter Sylvie had been taken, became a watchful presence. They found solace in shared suffering, a quiet solidarity among those the system had tried to isolate. The children grew up in the mission walls with carefully crafted narratives. They were told their mothers had given them up willingly, out of love, to escape poverty and ignorance. They learned that obedience was love, that remembering Africa was dangerous, that their only home was now the mission, their only family the priests and nuns. Yet the truth lingered, small and persistent. In whispered moments, in dreams, in memories too young to be fully erased, the past lived on. And Dubois recorded it, every stolen glance, every whispered name, every stolen moment of recognition. His ledger became a quiet archive of resistance, a hidden witness to the human cost of the Belgian Métis program. Part 4 will reveal how some children began to question the lessons they were taught, how small acts of defiance started to ripple through the mission walls, and how the mothers on the outside continued their relentless, painful watch, holding on to hope in a system designed to erase it. If this story chills you, share it, like it, and subscribe to follow this journey into a history too often forgotten. The children of shame deserve to be remembered. Part 4. Whispers of Resistance and the Children's Silent Rebellion. The sun burned high over Katanga province, turning the red dust into a haze that shimmered like heat on a mirror. At the Mission de Saint-Joseph, the children moved in precise lines, their small feet stirring clouds of dirt with every step. They wore the white uniforms of European order, their hair combed and faces scrubbed clean, the echo of colonial discipline ringing in every corner of the courtyard. Yet beneath the forced obedience, a quiet resistance was beginning to stir. Celeste Deschamps, once Marie-Thérèse Kouina's baby, walked with the other girls, her eyes scanning the walls, searching for something she could not name. She did not remember her mother's face, not really, only fleeting flashes of warmth, a lullaby half forgotten, and a sense that something essential had been taken from her. The older children sometimes whispered to each other, tiny secrets shared under the shadows of chapel columns or beneath the wide verandas, fragments of memory that refused to die. Father Antoine Dubois watched carefully, his ledger open and pen poised. He recorded every whispered name, every tentative question about mothers and villages, every fleeting spark of doubt in the children's eyes. Dubois believed in their humanity, even as the system around them sought to crush it. He knew that knowledge and empathy could not erase the policies that had stolen these children, but he also believed that memory could survive, quietly, like seeds hidden under snow. Outside the walls, Marie-Thérèse continued her vigil. The termite mound where she balanced to catch a glimpse of the courtyard had become a place of ritual. She came every Sunday, her eyes straining over the jagged glass and peeling white paint. She watched Celeste, or what she thought might be Celeste, laughing, running, playing under the watchful eyes of nuns. Each week, the girl seemed a little taller, a little more distant. Each week, the ache in Marie-Thérèse's chest grew sharper, the distance between them measured not just in kilometers but in stolen years and stolen identity. Other mothers joined her, forming a silent council of grief. Josephine, who had lost her son Patrice, shared whispered advice on spotting behavior patterns in the children, how a child's laugh could hint at remembered joy, how a glance might betray a fragment of memory. Amina, whose twins had been taken, had learned to track which children were likely to be transferred next, quietly warning the others. Beatrice, still mourning her daughter Sylvie, became the group's strategist, finding paths along fences, noting shifts in guard rotations, listening for information carried by sympathetic servants who worked at the mission. The children themselves were learning, in small ways, to assert fragments of freedom. During recreation, they would invent secret signals, a wink, a tap on the shoulder, a whispered name in Luba, trying to preserve the memory of the families that had been erased from their lives. Celeste did not yet have the language to ask for her mother, but she could mimic the songs she had heard in the servants' quarters, melodies that stuck stubbornly in her mind. The other children listened, repeating them in secret, a hidden chorus that defied the mission's order. Dubois began to notice patterns in these acts of resistance. He saw that some children would intentionally misplace their utensils, pretending clumsiness, just to steal a few moments of unobserved movement. Others would feign sleep in the dormitories, whispering in the dark. He recorded all of it, careful to hide his ledger from prying eyes. This was dangerous work. Discovery could mean the loss of his position, or worse. But Dubois understood something fundamental. Even in the rigid structure of colonial control, the human spirit found cracks to slip through. Meanwhile, the Belgian administration in Brussels continued to report progress. Efficiency, education, morality, these were the words they used. They wrote in the calm detachment of their offices, far removed from the cries of children, far removed from the mothers who waited by the walls. They had no idea, or refused to acknowledge, that the children were quietly resisting, that the lessons of obedience were being rewritten in whispered songs and secret glances. At night, the mission was silent except for the occasional creak of shutters and the soft rustle of sheets. Celeste lay in her cot, staring at the ceiling, her small hands clenching a corner of her uniform. She dreamed of warmth, of an embrace that had long been denied, and in her dreams, the images of her mother's face would appear, flickering in fragments. Some nights, the older children would gather near the window, whispering in Luba, singing songs they barely remembered, and the small lights of rebellion shone in their eyes. Marie-Thérèse never stopped watching. She learned the patterns of the nuns, the quiet ways the guards shifted, the moments when children ran unobserved to fetch water or chase a ball. She memorized every detail of the mission's schedule, every narrow gap that might someday allow a glimpse, or even more. She kept the 200 francs hidden, a talisman of her fight, a reminder that her daughter's life had a cost she refused to forget. Over time, Dubois became a quiet ally. He began leaving small messages, carefully hidden, for the older children who could read French, encouraging them to remember, to preserve the stories of their families, to whisper their histories to one another. These messages were dangerous, small sparks of defiance, but they gave the children hope. Hope was a dangerous thing in a world built to crush it, yet it persisted. The mothers on the outside and the children on the inside were connected by invisible threads. A glance, a whisper, a song, each an act of remembrance, each a refusal to let the system fully erase what had been taken. And in that fragile network of memory and resilience, a slow, growing tension began to form. The Belgian authorities remained blind to it. Efficiency reports continued to arrive in Brussels. Quotas were met, the children were educated and civilized. Yet in the quiet moments, the moments the colonial administration would never witness, the children were learning that they had a past, that they had mothers who loved them, that the mission walls could not contain memory, love, or resistance. In Part 5, the story will reveal the small revolts within the mission, how whispers turned into subtle defiance, and how Marie-Thérèse began to plan ways to reconnect with her daughter. The struggle between the colonial machinery and the human spirit was only beginning, and cracks were appearing in the carefully constructed system of control. If this story has gripped you, share it with others, hit like, and subscribe. The children of shame and their mothers deserve to be remembered, and the world must not forget their quiet, enduring courage. Part 5, Cracks in the Walls and the Whispered Revolt. The Mission de Saint-Joseph was designed to be unyielding, a fortress of order and control. Whitewashed walls gleamed in the brutal Katangan sun, high fences topped with broken glass and guards stationed at every corner. Inside, the children moved with the precision of well-oiled machinery, uniforms spotless, hands folded, voices carefully measured. Everything was controlled. Everything was monitored. Everything was supposed to belong to Belgium. But order, no matter how rigid, can never fully contain the human spirit. Celeste Deschamps, now nearly 12 years old, had grown into a quiet, observant child. She carried within her fragments of memory, shadows of lullabies, fleeting images of a woman's warmth, her mother's warmth, that no amount of discipline could erase. The older children, who remembered more, began to test the edges of the mission's rules. A ball would roll over the courtyard and not be returned immediately. A whispered name would linger in the dormitories after lights out. Tiny acts, unnoticed by some, carefully observed by others. Father Antoine Dubois had been at the mission for nearly a decade. His ledger, now thick with years of hidden records, had become a map of resistance. He recorded every question about mothers, every song sung in secret, every moment the children dared to remember. He began to notice patterns. Children were helping one another hide small belongings, exchanging notes written in tiny French script or even in stolen Luba letters. They were building networks of trust, learning that memory and solidarity were stronger than the walls around them. Outside the walls, Marie-Thérèse Kawina had not stopped her vigil. She knew the children's schedules, the guard rotations, the narrow moments when one could see the courtyard from the termite mound. Each Sunday she came, her eyes straining to find her daughter. She could no longer distinguish Celeste among the other girls, all dressed in the same white uniforms, their faces scrubbed clean. But she watched anyway, hoping for a flicker, a gesture, any hint that her daughter still carried a piece of her past. Other mothers joined her. Josephine, Amina, Beatrice, women bound together by grief and by the quiet fury of injustice. They shared observations, whispered strategies, exchanged news from sympathetic servants who worked inside the mission. Each mother became a node in a network of vigilance, tracking the children, preserving hope, refusing to be erased. Inside the mission, subtle acts of defiance grew bolder. Celeste learned to mimic the lullabies she had overheard in whispers, singing quietly to herself in the dormitory, sharing songs with friends who also remembered fragments of mothers, homes, and villages. They developed secret codes to communicate when the nuns were not watching. A tap on the shoulder, a glance at a particular corner of the courtyard, a shared hum of a tune, small gestures that carried enormous meaning. Dubois watched and guided them carefully. He did not encourage disobedience that would provoke punishment, but he reinforced the importance of memory. Remember who you are, he would write in notes hidden in the library or tuck into the folds of the children's books. Your past belongs to you. Do not let it be erased. Belgian administrators in Brussels continued to praise the mission's efficiency. Reports arrived detailing the number of children educated, the hours spent on catechism, the successes of assimilation. They wrote of progress, morality, and civilization, oblivious to the quiet rebellion growing within the walls. To them, the children were tools, numbers, evidence of a successful program. They did not know, and could not imagine, the ways in which their plans were quietly being undermined by the very people they sought to control. Marie-Thérèse began to take bolder steps. She spoke with servants, traded rumors, and followed subtle signs that the children were transferring between missions. Each Sunday, she adjusted her position on the termite mound, trying to catch sight of familiar gestures. Sometimes she thought she saw Celeste laughing with other girls. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of a pattern in how the older children played, a signal, a message. She clung to each fragment, desperate for proof that memory and love had survived the enforced separation. One afternoon, Celeste noticed a small leather-bound book tucked into the corner of the library. Father Dubois had hidden it carefully, but children were clever, and curiosity is a powerful force. She opened it and found names, stories, questions, and songs, notes about children who remembered mothers, mothers who waited, songs sung in secret. She read quietly, memorizing every word, understanding for the first time that the longing she felt was shared, that she was not alone in her grief, her fear, her confusion. Dubois observed her reading but did not intervene. He knew that awakening awareness in the children was dangerous, yet essential. Knowledge, he believed, could become a shield, a weapon, and a source of resilience. These children, stripped of their families, were learning that memory could not be erased, that connection could survive even the most rigid control. The courtyard, once a symbol of oppression, began to pulse with subtle defiance. Children traded secrets beneath the shadows of the jacaranda trees. Notes moved from hand to hand. Songs passed from lips to lips in whispers. Eyes met across the playground, carrying meanings that the nuns and priests could not decode. Resistance, once invisible, was growing. Outside, Marie-Therese noticed small changes too. Sometimes a child would glance toward the perimeter walls, a fleeting recognition, a flash that spoke to her heart in ways words could not. Sometimes she swore she saw Celeste's smile, small and cautious, as if the child remembered the mother she had never known. These moments were fleeting, but they were enough. Enough to sustain hope, enough to keep her vigil alive. And in Brussels, the administration remained blind. To them, order reigned. Discipline prevailed. Children were educated, civilized, Christianized. Efficiency was praised. They could not see, could not understand, that within the walls, memory lived, resistance grew, and the human spirit refused to be controlled. In Part 6, the story will explore the first daring attempts of children to reclaim pieces of their past, how whispers turn into small acts of courage, and how Marie-Therese begins to find new ways to reach her daughter. The cracks in the walls are widening, and the seeds of rebellion are taking root, threatening to overturn a system built on cruelty and silence. If this story grips you, share it with others, hit like, and subscribe. The children of shame and their mothers are still calling for remembrance, and the world must listen. Part 6. The First Acts of Courage and the Seeds of Rebellion. The wind blew fiercely across the copper-stained streets of Elizabethville, carrying with it the scent of dust, sweat, and iron from the distant mines. At the Mission de Saint Joseph, the children were lined up in the courtyard, moving with mechanical precision as if fear itself had carved their movements into stone. White uniforms gleamed under the sun, shoes polished, hands folded, heads bowed. To an outsider, it looked like discipline. To those who understood, it was quiet defiance waiting for a spark. Celeste Deschamps, now approaching 13, had learned the art of careful observation. She had memorized the shifts of the guards, the timing of meals, the rare moments when a nun's attention wavered. Memory was her compass, and hope her fuel. She could not name her mother, could not recall the lullabies she once heard, but something inside her ached for what had been stolen, for a past she had never fully known. Father Antoine Dubois continued to work in the shadows, his ledger thick with hidden accounts of the children's stories. He had begun to notice patterns in their behavior, the way they whispered at night, the songs that were passed quietly between dormitories, the notes traded under blankets. These small acts, invisible to most, were acts of courage, defiance against a system built on erasure. Dubois believed that if the children could hold on to memory, if they could preserve fragments of their true selves, then no matter what the colonial authorities tried to erase, identity would survive. It began with whispers. A child asked another the name of her village. Another shared a fragment of a lullaby. One child told the story of a mother who waited outside the mission wall, eyes scanning for her lost child. These whispers were dangerous, punishable with hours of kneeling, with corporal reprimand, with the constant reminder that obedience was the only path to survival. Yet, the children persisted. Celeste found herself drawn to these whispered networks. She learned which children remembered the past, which ones had mothers still waiting, which had older siblings separated into other missions. Each fragment became a treasure, a piece of the puzzle of her own identity. She memorized names, faces, songs, and gestures. Slowly, carefully, she began to connect with other children, forming bonds that could not be broken by uniform, by schedule, by walls. Outside the mission walls, Marie-Therese Kawina had not stopped her vigil. Every Sunday, she walked to the termite mound, balancing precariously to catch the faintest glimpse of her daughter. Each week she hoped for a flicker, a movement, a sign of recognition. Other mothers joined her, creating a silent council of grief and strategy. Josephine, Amina, and Beatrice, women bound together by sorrow and determination, shared knowledge about guard rotations, about nuns' routines, about whispers from sympathetic servants. Each Sunday became a meeting of quiet resistance, a network of mothers who refused to accept what had been taken from them. Inside the mission, the children's small acts of defiance began to grow bolder. Celeste and her friends would sneak notes into the corners of the library, notes hidden under books or tucked into cracks in the walls. They would pass messages using coded gestures, a tap on a shoulder, a glance, a sequence of nods. They memorized songs in Luba and whispered them at night, a secret soundtrack of memory and identity. Father Dubois noticed. He saw the courage in their eyes, the flicker of hope that refused to die. He could not openly intervene, could not challenge the mission's policies without jeopardizing his position and the safety of the children. But he did what he could. Hidden notes, subtle encouragements, questions that prompted the children to speak about their pasts. His ledger became a sanctuary, a record not only of oppression but of resistance, proof that identity could survive even under the strictest control. One day, during a routine inspection, a group of older children executed a small act of rebellion. They refused to eat until one of their friends, a boy named Patrice, who had been punished the previous week for speaking in Luba, was allowed a moment to sing a lullaby from home. The nuns were furious, but the children's unity and careful timing made resistance difficult to punish without drawing attention. Dubois took note of their courage, quietly marking it in his ledger. The act was small, almost invisible to the administration, but monumental to the children. Marie-Thérèse, watching from the termite mound, noticed changes in the children's behavior. Sometimes she saw a child pause and glance toward the wall, eyes wide, perhaps noticing her presence. Sometimes she thought she glimpsed Celeste laughing with friends, a spark of recognition, a hint of the bond they had lost. These moments, fleeting though they were, sustained her hope and strengthened her resolve. Belgian officials in Brussels continued to praise the mission's efficiency, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing within its walls. Reports described order, discipline, education, and moral progress. They did not see the coded notes, the whispered songs, the children exchanging fragments of memory like precious treasures. They could not understand that every act of remembrance, every whispered word, every secret song was a rebellion against their carefully constructed system. By 1938, the children had developed subtle communication networks across dormitories and play areas. Celeste became one of the most observant, learning the nuances of signals, reading expressions, memorizing patterns. These networks allowed them to preserve small pieces of their past, to share memories, and to support each other in ways the adults could not fully control. Marie-Thérèse began to take new risks. She spoke with sympathetic servants, traded rumors, and gathered information about transfers between missions. She recorded schedules, memorized the times when the guards shifted, and learned which paths might allow her to see more of the courtyard. Her vigilance became strategic, focused, and unrelenting. The first sparks of hope, tiny and fragile, were appearing. Mothers and children alike were discovering that memory could not be stolen, that love could persist despite walls, fences, and punishment. The seeds of rebellion, planted quietly and nurtured by courage, were beginning to grow. In Part 7, the story will reveal how these sparks ignite, as the children take bolder risks to preserve their identity and memories, and how Marie-Thérèse begins to find ways to communicate with her daughter beyond the walls. The machinery of the colonial system may be vast, but it is not unbreakable. If this story grips you, share it with friends, hit like, and subscribe. The voices of the children and their mothers deserve to be heard, and the world must remember their courage. Part 7, Whispers turn to defiance and the quest for freedom. The sun rose over Elizabethville, casting long shadows across the copper-stained streets, and the Mission de Saint Joseph stood as imposing as ever, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the harsh morning light. To the untrained eye, life at the mission seemed orderly, quiet, and disciplined. But beneath the surface, tension simmered like molten metal beneath a calm exterior. Memory, hope, and love, things no bureaucrat could measure, were quietly stirring acts of defiance. Celeste Deschamps, now 14, had grown sharp and careful, like a cat learning to move without sound. She remembered fleeting fragments of lullabies, the warmth of a mother she could barely picture, and the hidden joy of songs exchanged with other children in whispers. She had become a quiet leader among the older children, teaching them the subtle language of resistance, glances, taps, coded notes hidden in books, and small gestures that carried messages their overseers could not decode. Every day was a balance between compliance and courage, and each act of defiance, no matter how small, felt monumental. Father Antoine Dubois continued to guide them from the shadows. His ledger had grown thick with years of hidden records, but it was more than just documentation. It had become a secret map of the children's courage, detailing who remembered what, who sang which songs, who had family outside the walls, and which children were beginning to ask questions the nuns could not answer. He understood the power of collective memory and the quiet strength it gave the children, teaching them that identity was more resilient than any fence or uniform. Outside the walls, Marie-Thérèse Kouina's determination had hardened into strategy. She could no longer distinguish Celeste among the other girls at the mission, but she watched nonetheless, taking careful notes on movements, guard rotations, and daily routines. Other mothers joined her, forming a silent network of observation. Josephine, Amina, and Beatrice, women whose children had been stolen under the same cruel decree, shared knowledge, traded warnings about suspicious officials, and quietly communicated with sympathetic servants who had retained loyalty to the mothers. Each Sunday became a session of planning, observation, and quiet resistance. Inside the mission, the children's acts of defiance grew bolder. One day, during recreation, Patrice, Josephine's son, gathered a group of older children in a corner of the courtyard and whispered instructions. They created a pattern of tapping on benches, a rhythm that allowed them to communicate across the play area without being detected by the nuns. Celeste observed and memorized. Every glance, every whispered instruction, every subtle movement was part of a carefully orchestrated network. The mission's administration remained oblivious. Reports from Brussels praised the efficiency, morality, and educational success of the Métis program. Officials praised the strict schedules, the order, the progress in raising children as Christian Europeans. They could not see the quiet rebellion unfolding under their noses, the songs, the secret gestures, the coded notes that carried memory and hope across dormitories. Dubois encouraged the children carefully, embedding small lessons in reading and writing exercises that allowed them to preserve their personal histories. He asked questions that prompted them to remember details of their homes, their mothers, the lullabies they had once heard. These memories, he told them quietly, were theirs to protect. He warned them that outsiders could not understand, could not help, but the strength they found within themselves and each other could never be taken. Marie-Thérèse began to test new methods of connection. She discovered that small objects could be left along the perimeter of the mission, an embroidered handkerchief, a folded note, a hidden token, that might be noticed by Celeste or other children who were careful observers. It was dangerous, but she calculated the risks carefully, balancing hope with survival. Each object left behind became a symbol, a whisper from mother to child, a reminder that love and memory had survived the separation. Celeste discovered one of these objects one afternoon. A small, folded handkerchief embroidered with a pattern she recognized from the lullabies her mother had sung. Her heart leapt. For the first time, she felt a tangible connection to a life outside the mission, proof that she had not been forgotten, that her mother still searched, that her past had not been erased. She shared the discovery in secret with a close friend, careful not to draw attention, passing along the story and spreading hope among the children. The children's network began to expand beyond the boundaries of the mission. They learned to watch for subtle signals from sympathetic servants, who would pass small items or information during chores. They shared whispered messages about who had been transferred, which children were new arrivals, and which older children remembered their mothers. Each bit of information became a piece of the larger puzzle, helping the children understand their world, plan small acts of resistance, and preserve the memory of families that colonial policy sought to erase. Outside, the mothers continued their vigil. Marie-Thérèse noticed small changes in the children's behavior, sometimes a glance toward the wall, sometimes a pause in play that suggested recognition. She began to record the children's movements, noting when they seemed to notice her presence. Each observation reinforced her determination and informed her strategy. She was no longer just watching, she was participating, quietly influencing the subtle dance of rebellion. The network of children, mothers, and sympathetic adults became a fragile ecosystem of resistance. Every act, small, almost invisible, was a challenge to the authority of the mission and the colonial system that had created it. Every whisper, every song, every handkerchief, every secret note was an assertion of identity, proof that memory and love could survive even under the harshest oppression. In 1940, the cracks in the system began to widen. The children's subtle rebellions, once isolated, almost invisible, started to connect. Information, courage, and hope spread like a quiet fire. Celeste had become a beacon of careful resistance, a link between memory and action. The mothers, too, were no longer passive observers, they were strategists, planners, and witnesses, keeping alive the knowledge that their children's identities mattered, that the colonial system could not erase them completely. In Part 8, the story will explore the first tangible attempts to reconnect mother and child, how the children take daring steps to assert their identity, and how Marie-Thérèse moves from observation to action. The silent resistance is gaining momentum, and the colonial walls may not hold forever. If this story has gripped you, share it with friends, hit like, and subscribe. The courage of these children and their mothers is a lesson in resilience, and the world must hear their voices. Part 8, Risking Everything, the First Reconnections. The dry wind swept across the red dust of Elizabethville, carrying with it the faint metallic scent of copper from the distant mines. The Mission de Saint Joseph stood in its familiar, oppressive white, a fortress of discipline and separation. But within its walls, and outside in the streets where mothers like Marie-Thérèse Kouina waited, the air crackled with a new energy, a restless, determined courage that could no longer be contained. Celeste Deschamps, now 15, had grown taller, sharper, and more careful. She had learned the rules of survival, but she had also learned the subtle art of defiance. Every glance, every whispered note, every song in Luba was a thread connecting her to her past, to the mothers and siblings who had been torn from her. Each thread strengthened her, creating a network of identity that no walls could erase. One afternoon, as the children were allowed outside for recreation, Celeste noticed a small, familiar movement along the perimeter wall. A handkerchief fluttered briefly in the breeze, tied to a low branch by someone on the outside. Her heart raced. She recognized the pattern of embroidery immediately. It was the same design her mother had once stitched on her clothes. This was a message, proof, a tangible link to a world beyond the mission. Celeste carefully retrieved the handkerchief when the nuns were distracted and hid it under her uniform. Later that night, she showed it to Patrice and a few trusted friends. They nodded in quiet understanding. The handkerchief was more than a token, it was a signal. Someone on the outside, someone who still remembered them, was reaching out. Meanwhile, Marie-Thérèse had begun to take greater risks. The termite mound she had used for months to watch the mission had become a strategic vantage point. She studied guard rotations, noted the brief lapses in surveillance, and marked the moments when children played closest to the wall. Each Sunday, she left small tokens, an embroidered handkerchief, a folded scrap of paper with a single word written on it, a pebble carefully placed to signal her presence. She was testing, hoping that someone would notice, that her daughter could see her. The first successful communication came quietly, almost imperceptibly. Celeste found the handkerchief, understood the signal, and left a small token of her own, a tiny carved piece of wood, smoothed and shaped during secret hours in the dormitory. It was a message. I see you. I am here. The next week, Marie-Thérèse found it and pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face. After years of separation, they had begun to speak again, not with words, but with objects, with gestures, with memory. Father Antoine Dubois continued to watch from the inside, quietly encouraging the children's courage without revealing his knowledge to the nuns. He had become a guardian of sorts, a silent ally in their delicate rebellion. His ledger recorded every token exchanged, every whispered signal, every act of defiance that preserved memory and identity. He understood that these small victories mattered more than any official decree. The children began to experiment with more daring acts. They would sneak notes during lessons, pass messages in coded sequences of taps on benches, and memorize instructions to leave objects at precise locations along the wall. Every act was carefully planned, executed in whispers, in shadows, in ways that the mission's overseers could not detect. Each token of communication became a lifeline, a reminder that love and memory could survive, even in the harshest conditions. Marie-Thérèse expanded her network. Other mothers who had joined her vigil became partners in these quiet efforts. Josephine, Amina, Beatrice, they observed, documented, and left small messages of encouragement, hiding them where the children might find them. Each object, each gesture, reinforced the bond between mothers and children, defying the colonial system that sought to erase it. The network grew beyond simple tokens. Celeste and a few older children began sharing songs and stories, embedding memories of home, of mothers, of villages, of love, into seemingly innocuous bedtime whispers. These stories became shared knowledge, a culture within the walls of the mission, quietly resisting the erasure imposed by the priests and nuns. Yet danger always loomed. The nuns were vigilant, and any act of disobedience could bring punishment, hours of kneeling, removal from play, extra chores, or worse. The children had to be clever, subtle, almost invisible. But with each successful message, each successful act of communication, their courage grew, and with it, their sense of agency. They were no longer simply victims of the mission, they were participants in their own story, reclaiming identity piece by piece. Marie-Thérèse herself grew bolder. She began memorizing names and faces, noting which children might be her own and which were older or younger siblings of others in her network. She marked possible paths to leave messages more efficiently, timing each attempt to minimize risk. Every Sunday, her vigil became more precise, more purposeful, more strategic. The quiet desperation of years gave way to calculated action. By 1942, the network had grown extensive enough that children from different dormitories shared information through secret channels, exchanging coded messages, objects, and whispered songs. Celeste, Patrice, and others acted as intermediaries, passing information that allowed mothers and sympathetic servants to connect in small, almost imperceptible ways. Every success was a rebellion, every message a victory, every smile, glance, or recognition, proof that the system could not fully break them. And yet, for every small victory, there was the risk of discovery. The nuns, still rigid and unyielding, occasionally intercepted a token or overheard a whisper. Punishments followed swiftly, a reminder that freedom came at a price. But the children had learned resilience. They adapted, shifted, hid, and found new methods. Their defiance became cleverer, their network more sophisticated, their hope unshakable. In Part 9, the story will reveal how this network of mothers and children grows into something unstoppable, how bold plans for reunification begin to form, and how Celeste and Marie-Thérèse prepare for the most dangerous acts of resistance yet. The quiet sparks of rebellion are about to ignite into a fire that cannot be contained. If this story captivates you, share it with friends, hit like, and subscribe. The courage of these children and their mothers is extraordinary, and the world must witness their resilience. Part 9, The Dawn of Reunion, Dangerous Plans and Courageous Hearts. The first light of dawn over Elizabethville revealed a city still drenched in dust and copper, but in the shadows of the Mission de Saint Joseph, a quiet storm was brewing. Years of observation, small acts of defiance, and whispered communication had created a fragile web connecting children and their mothers. And now, the first whispers of a daring plan began to circulate. Celeste Deschamps, 16 and sharper than ever, had become a linchpin in this network of resistance. She knew every detail of the mission, every guard rotation, every blind spot in the walls. She had memorized the routines of the nuns and priests, learning where the oversight was weakest. And she had learned to trust her instincts, honed through years of living under strict surveillance. Every glance, every gesture, every small object she hid carried meaning. Marie-Thérèse Kawina had grown bolder too. The years of watching, memorizing, and leaving tokens had honed her ability to plan and predict. She had studied the movements of the mission staff, the routines of patrols, the timing of prayers and meals. She had discovered patterns, small gaps in the iron system that might allow for direct action. She understood the danger. Punishment for the smallest misstep could be severe, but the hope of reunion burned too brightly to ignore. The plan began as a whisper among the older children. Celeste and Patrice carefully shared the idea. Small groups would test the boundaries, leave messages outside the walls in a more coordinated way, and signal to the mothers which children could be safely guided out of the mission. It was a strategy that required precision, patience, and courage. A single mistake could destroy everything. Father Antoine Dubois watched these subtle maneuvers with cautious approval. He had continued his secret ledger, documenting not only the children's lives but also the patterns of oppression. He provided guidance when he could, teaching them to use their knowledge of the mission's layout, the timings of chores, and the blind spots in supervision. Dubois knew that the children's agency was their most powerful tool, and he quietly nurtured it. The first small success came unexpectedly. A younger child, long taken from a mother far away, discovered a token that Celeste had hidden, a folded scrap of cloth with a single word embroidered in Luba. The child recognized it immediately, a small beacon of hope, and delivered it to another child in secret. Word spread, and for the first time, the children realized they were not isolated. Each of them had allies, channels, and pathways to communicate across the dormitories. Encouraged by these small victories, Marie-Thérèse began leaving more daring messages. She placed small objects near the perimeter wall, carved wooden toys, notes folded into origami shapes, scraps of fabric stitched with familiar patterns. Each one was a lifeline, proof that she was still present, still searching, still fighting for her children. One evening, Celeste retrieved a folded note tucked beneath a loose stone at the base of the wall. It contained instructions: meet at a specific location in the forest outside the mission during the next full moon. The handwriting was unmistakable, her mother's. Her heart pounded. This was no longer a token, it was a plan, a call to action, a tangible possibility of reunion. Preparations were painstaking. Celeste and the older children shared knowledge with the younger ones without alerting the nuns. They rehearsed movements, memorized guard rotations, and created signals for when danger approached. Every action was deliberate, every pause calculated. The children had become experts in invisibility, teaching each other how to blend in, how to mislead watchful eyes, and how to protect the youngest among them. Marie-Thérèse, too, had her own strategy. She coordinated with the other mothers and sympathetic servants who had access to roads and forest paths. They arranged safe spots, marked by subtle signs: a tied ribbon on a branch, a carved notch on a tree trunk, a small pile of stones. Each marker was a signal, guiding the children toward freedom without drawing attention from the mission staff. As the night of the full moon arrived, tension was unbearable. Celeste and a group of 3 older children crept through the dormitory, their hearts pounding, aware that discovery meant punishment or worse. Every step was silent, every breath measured. They reached the outer wall, where a loose brick had been carefully removed for them to squeeze through. Beyond lay the forest, the first step toward the long-awaited reunion. Outside, Marie-Thérèse waited, heart in her throat, eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The other mothers stood hidden nearby, their hands trembling, their nerves taut with anticipation. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, a flicker of movement, a figure darting from shadow to shadow, followed by 2 more. The children had made it out. Celeste was first, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had memorized years of surveillance and discipline. The reunion was quiet at first, a mixture of tears, whispers, and embraces. Marie-Thérèse clutched Celeste tightly, memorizing the feel of her daughter's hair, the warmth of her shoulders, the unmistakable scent she remembered from infancy. The other children joined, linking hands with the mothers who had fought tirelessly to find them. For a moment, the years of separation and suffering melted into something more profound, a bond that even the most rigid colonial system could not sever. But this was only the beginning. The group could not linger. The forest offered temporary refuge, but the mission would soon notice absences, and pursuit was inevitable. Celeste, Marie-Thérèse, and the others had to move carefully, relying on the coded markers, hidden paths, and trust they had cultivated over years. Every step was dangerous, but the promise of freedom, of reclaiming stolen childhoods and familial bonds, outweighed the fear. Word of this daring escape spread quietly among the children still inside the mission. It became a symbol, a spark of hope that whispered across walls and dormitories. More children began planning small acts of defiance, waiting for the right moment, inspired by Celeste's courage and her mother's unyielding determination. In Part 10, the story reaches its climax, the final daring reunions, the confrontation with the colonial authorities, and the reckoning for a system built on the theft of childhood. Celeste and Marie-Thérèse's journey shows the triumph of courage, love, and resilience over years of systemic cruelty. If this story keeps you on edge, share it with friends, hit like, and subscribe. The extraordinary bravery of these mothers and children reminds us that even in the darkest systems, the human spirit can fight back. Part 10, the final reunion, courage, justice, and remembrance. Imagine a world where your child is taken from your arms, not by accident or violence but by law. Where officials, priests, and bureaucrats decide that your love is insufficient, that your child belongs to the state. For Marie-Thérèse Kawina, this was reality. For decades, she had lived with the ache of Celeste's absence, the constant reminder of a system designed to erase her family. But now, after years of secret messages, coded tokens, and careful observation, the impossible was within reach. By 1945, the network of mothers and children had grown remarkably strong. Celeste, now 21, had matured into a woman of fierce intelligence and quiet strength. Her time at the Mission de Saint-Joseph had forged resilience, but it had also given her skills. She understood surveillance, timing, and the subtleties of human behavior. More importantly, she had learned the power of hope. Marie-Thérèse, older now, carried the weight of years, but her determination was undimmed. Every note, every carved token, every whispered memory had led to this moment. She had allies across the city, other mothers, sympathetic servants, and even some of the Congolese officials who quietly disapproved of the Métis program. Together, they plotted the final reunions, the extraction of children from missions, and the reclaiming of families stolen by bureaucratic cruelty. The plan was audacious. Celeste and a small group of trusted friends would create diversions at the mission gates while others assisted children over the walls and along secret paths. Every movement was choreographed. Timing was critical. If anyone failed, the mission staff would respond with force, and the children's freedom could vanish in an instant. When the night arrived, the city seemed to hold its breath. The red dust shimmered in the moonlight, streets silent, the distant hum of the copper mines a reminder of the colonial machinery that had caused so much suffering. Celeste moved with her companions, precise and silent, signaling with subtle gestures as they advanced toward the outer wall of the mission. Marie-Thérèse waited in the shadows, heart racing. She had memorized every detail, every rotation of the mission staff. She knew where to place herself, how to guide each child safely. And then she saw them, children slipping through shadows, guided by Celeste and the older youths who had learned to navigate the oppressive system. One by one, they reached the mothers waiting in the darkness, tears streaming, whispered words of reassurance exchanged. Celeste spotted her mother across the field. For a moment, time froze. 2 decades of separation, pain, and longing were compressed into a single instant. She ran, arms outstretched, and Marie-Thérèse met her, gripping her tightly, unwilling to let go. The other children and mothers celebrated quietly, aware that danger was still close, that they were not yet free, but relief and joy coursed through them, powerful and sustaining. The escape was tense. Guards had begun to notice irregularities, nuns and priests patrolling with growing suspicion. But the network worked flawlessly. Coded signals, hidden paths, and rapid coordination allowed each child to move toward temporary safe houses spread across the city. Every success emboldened the mothers. Every step forward was a victory against decades of systematic cruelty. As dawn approached, the mothers and children gathered in a hidden courtyard far from the mission. Celeste, holding her mother's hand, looked around at the other reunited families. There was laughter, quiet sobs, and whispered songs from Luba, Congolese melodies that had survived the mission's erasure. For the first time, the stolen children could speak freely of home, of parents, of heritage. But freedom did not mean the fight was over. The Belgian authorities were aware that the Métis program had been compromised. Reports were filed, investigations begun, and pressure mounted to regain control. The mothers and children prepared for this next challenge. They documented everything: the injustices, the stolen childhoods, the betrayals of priests and officials. Father Antoine Dubois had retired quietly but left behind his hidden ledger, which now became an invaluable record for the mothers to expose the truth. This documentation eventually reached sympathetic voices in Belgium and beyond. Investigations, advocacy, and international attention slowly brought acknowledgement of the horrors. Many of the children remained separated from families for years, but the courage and persistence of mothers like Marie-Thérèse ensured that some reunions were possible, that some justice could be served, and that the world would never entirely forget. Marie-Thérèse and Celeste eventually moved to a quieter town in Katanga, where they rebuilt their lives. They shared their story with a few trusted friends, ensuring the memory of stolen childhoods and systemic cruelty was preserved. Celeste became an advocate for other survivors, dedicating her life to education, preservation of heritage, and the fight against systemic injustice. The story of Les Enfants de la Honte is more than history. It is a reminder of the human cost of bureaucracy, of colonialism, and of systemic violence. It is a testament to courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds between mothers and children. Even in the darkest systems, love finds a way to survive, adapt, and ultimately triumph. This concludes the 10-part series, but the lessons live on. The courage of Marie-Thérèse Kouina, Celeste Deschamps, and countless unnamed mothers and children continues to inspire. Their story reminds us that even in the face of institutional cruelty, the human spirit is indomitable, capable of resistance, reunion, and reclaiming what was unjustly taken. If you found this story moving, shocking, or eye-opening, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel to follow more untold historical stories, leave a comment below telling us what part of this story touched you most, and hit the like button to support content that brings forgotten histories to light. Every voice, every share, helps ensure these stories are remembered and honored.